Hey everybody, so we are nearing the end of Unit 6. Today we're going to be looking at 6.10 and we're actually splitting this into two videos. So for today, we are going to be focusing on being able to explain the causes and effects of geographic change within urban areas. I'm going to be focusing on the first part, which talks all about how urban populations move within a city, economic and social changes result. So some of these include issues related to the housing and housing discrimination, such as redlining, blockbusting, and affordability, access to services, rising crime, environmental injustice, and the growth of disamenity zones or zones of abandonment. So we're going to go through those and see how this looks. So how are urban areas changing? So we see a few different ways that change happens in urban places. So one, people of different socioeconomic statuses are all in one area. So sometimes that means that there might be division about different important issues. And there also might be patterns of poverty or patterns of decay where certain parts of the urban environment just are not kept up. Also, in ways that urban areas change, we see that their uses are changing. Sometimes we see a shift from industrial practices to services. So service-based work or economics would be like, let's say, restaurants, right? Like the work that's done there, it's a service that is being provided as opposed to industrial activities that are like manufacturing and things like that. And also we see city governments trying to respond to some of these changes, but there's a lot of competing interests and different perspectives that need to be considered as decisions are being made. So moving forward for housing issues and discrimination, we're going to look at some causes. So first, there's a phenomenon called redlining. Okay, so redlining, that is housing discrimination that is maintained by banks. So the origin was in about the 1930s, more or less, and essentially banks would refuse to grant home loans in certain areas because of that area's ethnic or racial composition. So let's say if there was an African-American couple that went into a bank wanting to get a loan for a house in a like more upscale area where it was mostly like white Caucasians living there, then the bank would deny them that loan. So that was how redlining worked. This program that the government created in the 1930s identified areas of poor investment. And those were areas that were typically like people of color residents or African-American residents. Black buyers were restricted from obtaining loans to buy or improve homes in certain areas. And in those areas of poor investment, those fell into disrepair. Poverty also was part of an issue in that area, and segregation was maintained. So here we see a little example of how banks would define these zones of poor investment. So another way that this was done was through something called blockbusting, which is a similar underlying idea, but this was done through the real estate agencies and industry. So basically, white families were encouraged to quickly sell their homes once African-American families started to move into those neighborhoods. This is also called like white flight. So once people of color would start to move into that area, then the others would flee, right? So this was usually fear-based. White residents were also told that property values would quickly decrease because people of color were moving into the area, and then they would quickly sell their homes below market price, and it would kind of like perpetuate that issue. So it was almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy in some ways. And, you know, at face value, they would say that the cause or the reason would be that the value, it was like an economic decision, but ultimately it also came down to, racism, right? So Black families were charged higher rates to buy as well. And we saw this changing of racial composition in these neighborhoods. And ultimately it was the real estate agents and agencies that would benefit from making money. So this is an actual newspaper article published during that time period. So yeah, it was something that was very pervasive. Another cause, or kind of going a little bit more into that, if we take a look at this map here, we can see how redlining and blockbusting changes like that geographic, spatial pattern of where people live. So even though these practices were made illegal in the 60s, it still continued to happen in certain ways. And also, once that happens, then it's really hard to change the way that certain neighborhoods are perceived or the way that a neighborhood looks. So, this is a modern map. So, even though those practices have not been allowed officially in decades, we still see the effects of that. So, and then here we have like the breakdown of what predominant group is in what area. Also, affordability is a big one. Raising mortgages would make it very expensive for people to buy homes. We see this happening now. Low inventory, inflation contribute to this, and it makes average Americans struggle to try to purchase their own home. The U.S. Department for Housing and Urban Development funds low-income public housing, usually located in cities. About 60% of those are in cities, and only 19% of those are in suburbs. So because of this, there's more economic segregation due to a lack of affordable home ownership across the country. So the government-sponsored housing is in urban areas as opposed to suburban neighborhoods. So, and then here we can see how the cost of homes has increased and how the inventory has decreased. So some effects of these housing issues and discrimination issues. So there's a lack of access to services, so it's a lot more difficult to access in urban areas, especially with demographics that are low income, that might not have reliable transportation. So this creates a few different things. One of them is food deserts, which we went over in the previous unit. So a food desert, just as a recap, is a location where residents' access to affordable, healthy food options is restricted or non-existent due to the absence of grocery stores within a convenient traveling distance. So this is referring to fresh fruits and vegetables. So having an area that has mostly like fast food options or maybe convenience stores, they don't really have fresh food available. That's a food desert. So results of food deserts, like I just mentioned, corner stores, gas stations, fast food restaurants, those are accessible. A lot of times, because of the convenience of a gas station or a corner store, prices can be higher, but they still have like a big inventory of low quality foods that are just not healthy and nutritious, and that can create a lot of health issues like diabetes, heart disease, obesity. We do see higher rates of those. Another effect is healthy drinking water. Unfortunately, this is still an issue even in places like the United States. Lead exposure through underground lead pipes that deliver drinking water contaminate water supplies. And that has been proven time and time again. Lead is very unhealthy for you. So now the way that like paint is not allowed to have lead anymore, things like that. Health impacts are mostly observed in low-income minority communities. Disproportionately, they are the ones that are affected by these types of issues. Lead poisoning can lead to lower IQ, learning disabilities, and a lot of other health issues. And then here we have this like political cartoon of Flint, Michigan with their water supply. And unfortunately, it does affect people of color or people who are of lower socioeconomic status. Also, we have lack of access to healthcare. That is kind of goes hand in hand with that as well. Also, we have rising crime. When people are economically and racially segregated in urban areas, crime increases. Factors that impact this could include a lack of job opportunities for various reasons. There's been plenty of studies that have shown that if two CVs or two applications are submitted to the same job, usually the person that has, or the name that is like more foreign or sounds more like ethnic, they don't get reached out to. So job opportunities, lack of job opportunities can be rooted in a lot of different things. Also, lack of resources and lack of infrastructure in certain areas where we see higher poverty rates. Desperation and isolation, criminalization of homelessness, and mental health issues. And that usually is, tied to lack of healthcare services. So if we look at this little chart here, the rate of violent victimization by poverty level and location of residence. So here we have urban, suburban, and rural, and we can see how it affects these different urban zones, and then also how this affects different classes. And finally, we have environmental injustice. So essentially, communities of color and the poor are more likely to be exposed to the environmental burdens, such as air and water pollution. This is tied to a few different things like manufacturing and waste disposal. It's usually low-income neighborhoods that are next to like garbage dumps and that are next to factories. Also, highways and congestion. Those areas tend to be lower income. That's a lot of like noise pollution, a lot of things that maybe people of upper class don't want to deal with in their living situations. The use of lead in paint or pipes that supply water to homes, that can be seen in some places that are lower income. Prevalence of renters that cannot fix home issues themselves. People cannot buy their own homes. It's a lot harder for them to invest in their living space. They can't fix homes without the permission of their landlord. And also, if it's not theirs, then they don't have that reason to invest in that space. And then also food deserts. Oh, sorry, there's one more. Growth of disamenity zones. So this is referring to like unincorporated areas like favelas, like slums, basically places that are not safe and connected to city services like water and sewage lines. So these areas experience higher crime rates, sometimes gang presence, higher poverty. These are definitely flood prone because they don't have that infrastructure in place. Homelessness, all these sorts of issues. And then we have a growth of zones of abandonment. So areas that have just been completely abandoned due to a lack of jobs, housing opportunities, a decline in land values, or falling demand. So these are real examples here. Places where people just abandon because they don't have that economic reason to continue to live there. They'd rather go to places where there's more job opportunity or the land